Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the F1 Outlook. It has been 2 long hours since the Canadian GP, and yeah, I just thought I would do something for the race, just like I did after quali. And I'm trying to see if this is something we can do. This is supposed to be the first post-race debrief. I don't know what we're going to call it, but we're here for now. We'll just call it a post-race debrief. We're going to start things off with the things that matter, which is the results. Then I'll follow it up with a breakdown of the race. I wrote a bunch of notes for all the events that happened during the fun and chaotic race that we just experienced, and I took some screenshots, which I hope I can include in the final edit, but we'll see about that. So starting off with the results. We had Max Verstappen winning. It wasn't a light to flag victory. It was a very hard fought win. He finished in first, followed by Lando Norris, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Piastri, Alonso, Stroll, Ricciardo, Gasly, and Ocon. First thing you're probably going to be asking are where are the Ferraris? We'll get to them. They'll be on the second page. The Finishing the race, in 11th, we had Hulkenberg, followed by Magnussen, Bottas, Tsunoda, and Zhou. And our non-finishers were Sainz, Albon, Perez, Leclerc, and Sargent, with Lewis Hamilton getting the fastest lap on the last lap. The way that that impacts the championship is that now we have Max with I didn't do the math before, and it's a 56 point gap over Leclerc, followed by Norris, Sainz, Perez, and Piastri. Russell, Hamilton, Alonso, and Tsunoda finishing off the top 10. And then we have Stroll, Ricciardo, Behrman is still chilling in 13th, Hulkenberg, Gasly, Albon, Ocon, and Magnussen, with the drivers from Kick Sauber with 0 points being Zhou and Bottas. And I actually forgot there's actually a third page because we have Logan Sargent alone in 21st place. Even though he was having a good race today. In the constructors, Red Bull has pulled away thanks to Verstappen. Ferrari haven't moved, and we've had McLaren and Mercedes catch up a lot of points towards Ferrari more than Red Bull. And then we have Aston Martin, really RB Honda RBT. Okay. Racing Bulls, Haas, Alpine, Williams, and Kick Sauber in last position. Now for the race breakdown. Of course, I have to do it that way. So now for the race rundown. So now for the race breakdown. I'm going to just do this as per my notes, and hopefully this doesn't take too long. It's already been 4 minutes. So we're going to try and keep it close to 10 minutes, and we'll see how it goes. The beginning of the race was very wet with a lot of spray. The field spread out very much in the first few laps with gaps of up to 4 seconds between drivers because people were just basically trying to stay on the track. Most of the drivers started on the intermediates, but we had the Haas drivers who started out on wet tires, with Magnussen actually gaining a total of 8 positions up to fourth before he pitted on lap 6, and Hulkenberg gaining a total of 10 positions up to 8 before the track eventually dried up. They were so fast in the traction zones that they were basically able to, on each lap, pick off one driver per lap. And Magnussen started in 12th and ended up in 4th, and Hulkenberg started in 20th and in 18th and ended up 8th before the track dried up. Unfortunately, there wasn't more rain and the track dried up really quickly, so they started to fall behind, which is why Magnussen initially pitted and why Hulkenberg tried to stay out for a little longer, but he was causing a train of cars, and at a certain point he was passed by everybody, including Leclerc, who you understand that being a specific reference later. And at a certain point he pitted. I think it was probably around lap 10. Talking about Leclerc, after his troubling qualifying, the winner of the last race, Charles Leclerc, was suffering with engine issues very early on in the race, even from, I think, lap 2. This was causing him to lose 5 tenths per lap on the straights. After the race, he said 1.2 seconds could be the delta that he was losing. And yeah, initially he was speaking with his engineer. The engineer told him that it's an engine issue and he's going to have to just keep driving. But for now, they were happy with him continuing. Charles requested information of how much he was losing. At first, he was told that wasn't important, but then he wanted clarification on the specific number, so that I think it was so that he could understand how slow he was relative to the people around him, and then also how he could adjust how he drives. And that was actually funny because it was the dynamic between him and his engineer is slightly different, and it's actually quite nice to see, because now, instead of everything being almost streamlined where there's no conflict, where Charles might have just accepted the information, now he seems to be asking for information, for clarifications of information. And even with the initial communication from the wrong button, right? Even with initial communication from his engineer, we got the "we are checking" message, but it wasn't Charles asking a question and then him getting "we are checking." The engineer said, "We are having an issue with the engine. We are checking, but we're checking," I think is just their standard message. And then he said, "You can continue to drive the car." And then within the next lap, Charles had come back with a request for more information. Anyway, so he was actually managing to maintain his position. He actually got 2 positions, but he lost a few positions to end up back where he was in his 10th place. Before, in a strange move, Ferrari put him once onto new intermediates during the first safety car, and then they pitted him again. This time he stopped, they reset the car, and thus reset the engine, which kind of helped some of the issues. But when they pitted him the second time, instead of just leaving him and not changing the tires, they put him onto hard tires just as the rain was starting to fall again. This put him 30 seconds behind the leaders because it was just a safety car. And each lap that he was on these hards, which again, why hards, not mediums, he lost 10 seconds per lap until he put it again for intermediates, though he was still struggling for consistency of pace and ended up falling a lap behind before he eventually retired the car. In his post-race debrief with the media, he said that he kept having to change the switches 10 times per lap in order to manage the engine. So he didn't have a good race. But neither did Ferrari. But we'll get to that later. The beginning of the race, beyond that, was mostly about the cars driving around trying to stay on the track. With the track drying up slowly, rain was expected 20 minutes after the start of the race, which is basically around lap 20. Early on, Russell, having started in the front, stayed in the front. He had an early advantage, but he had Max and the McLarens keeping an honest. He was about 1.2 seconds ahead of them towards lap 20. And then towards the end of the stint, Russell started losing his rear tires, and the McLaren started showing their full pace. Because in that interchangeable conditions, it seemed that the Red Bull was still keeping up with everyone, but McLaren, as the track started to dry out and it was still cold, and the sun wasn't beaming through, McLaren had seemingly a sizable advantage, because you had Lando, who was 2 seconds behind Max, who caught up with him within less than a lap, and then you had Oscar Piastri behind, who was 1.2 seconds faster than Max. And then Max was basically keeping the same pace as George. And eventually Lando passed Verstappen, I think on lap 19, and then Russell around lap 20. The race was then seeming to have a. We were probably going to get into our first lull, except for waiting for people to pit. And then stepped in Logan Sargent. Now, Logan Sargent didn't have a great race. The beginning of the race, he was doing well. He was staying up there in P13. And then he made a mistake on lap 6 where he drove past turn 7. That sounds wrong. Why do I have the Imola picture for Canada? My thumbnail's wrong. Anyway. Sorry about that. Sorry. How did I not notice that? I mean, I did notice it before, but I don't think I was paying attention when I noticed. Let's try that again. Canadian GP track layout. Wow. Okay. I was like, that does not look like it. Okay. Okay. Back to what I was saying. Logan Sargent made a mistake at turn number 6. He went across the grass at the place where Vettel went off the track in 2012 when Button won on the final lap. That exact corner. And then later on at turn 4, he crashed out, spinning his own car on lap 25. This caused the first magic of the race, which also brought the first bit of indecision and the first bit of consequences for the race. Because around this time, we had Lando Norris, who was going for the lead. He was wanting to do an overcut, and so we had everybody except for him pit for their inters, and he was doing a 2-lap overcut, which was working. He was maintaining his pace, and people who pitted weren't gaining an advantage from the new tires because the track was so dry. So he was getting an advantage because his tires tread was so low that it was basically the inters were now slicks as they were, I think in 2020 in Turkey. But unfortunately, unlike Miami, he made it through and the safety car caught him. So this time he lost 10 seconds and he just managed to come out in front of Piastri. So he basically lost positions to Verstappen and to Russell. But before the safety car came out, he was driving 1 to 2 seconds faster than his peers. After the restart, Verstappen didn't pull away like he normally does. He was still closely pursued by 4 cars, namely Russell, Norris, Piastri, and Hamilton, who had made his way up to 5th position. So now, at this point, everybody's now taken their second set of inters. With the track drying out, it was all about waiting for the track to be ready for slicks. And after Charles showed that it might be possible early on his hards, it was Pierre Gasly on lap 41 who put on a set of hards. And then that was followed by Magnussen and Bottas on the next lap, who came in for mediums. And then the rest of the field pretty much came in except for Norris. Again, trying to go for the overcut. Norris tried staying out on his inters for 2 extra laps during this crossover. And while I was looking at the times, the people who had gone off the inters were doing 133s. Some people were doing 127s. Norris at this time was doing 123s. And in the previous segment, he was stuck behind Russell, so he couldn't really do anything. So they stayed out for extra 2 laps. He was showing good pace, and then Max finally got his tires to heat up because it was taking 2 laps for the dry tires to heat up, and he ended up gaining 2 positions. He almost kept the lead. He came out of the pits neck and neck with Verstappen, but unfortunately the outside line is not the racing line, so it was still wet. So he spun his tires, trying to put down the power. A little later in the race, we had some issues for one Sergio Perez, who already was having a difficult race, with some damage he sustained in a crash on the first lap on corner 2. He unfortunately on lap 52 spun out at turn 8, spinning by himself. In a weird way, he just went offline and then spun the car and rear-ended it into the safety barriers. He managed to continue and drive his car back to the pits with his rear wing dangling delicately off the rear structure. And it was actually the first screenshot that I took because I was like, I need this for the debrief, because this is like the visual spectacle of like Sergio Perez gets his contract and then this happens. Besides yesterday and the P16, this is worse because he didn't gain any positions up until lap 52. He was still basically in 16th position, even though the 2 Ferraris fell out, which means technically he was P18, which is terrible. Anyway, so now, what am I saying now? Perez got back to the pits, so there's no safety car. But then less than a lap later, on lap 54, with the track still with a single dry line, we had one Carlos Sainz trying to be a little bit aggressive on the slightly damp curbs and spinning out, rolling back across the track into Albon, who had tried avoiding action. Unfortunately, they touched. Sainz was able to get running again, though he was pirouetting in the wet grass, which is quite funny to see. And Albon, unfortunately, had suspension damage to his front right, so we had to have yet another safety car. Sainz managed to get his car running again, but he brought it back to the pits and retired it, and thus finishing off Ferrari's terrible weekend after a fantastic weekend the week before, finishing with 0 points after a victory in a 4th position the week before. 3rd position. Victory in a 3rd position the week before. Now, with the safety car coming out, there was an opportunity for the Mercedes drivers to put onto new tires. Given there was a big gap behind Hamilton of about 24 seconds, and given that they were under safety car speeds, they were able to come in and get new tires in order to try and grab an opportunity similar to what they did at Singapore, which worked quite successfully until, George hit the wall. And just like then, they were sitting pretty with those ahead now changing tires and a safety car restart to come. Which, unlike Singapore, they only had the VSC, so they had to catch up. Here, they were right on the tails of the 2 McLarens. So we had a Hamilton on the new hards, and we had Russell on new mediums. And for people speculating about Hamilton being sabotaged, having put it on mediums earlier on in the race, he only had hards at the second stop. And similarly, I have the tire sheet. Most teams only had 1 hard, 1 medium for the race, and no softs. Wait, that sounds wrong. 2 hards, 1 medium, and 1 soft. With most teams having run one of their mediums in FP2, and then most teams having used all their softs for qualifying. All the ones that got into Q3. With the Mercedes now on these new tires, from the race restart on lap 58, they were showing good pace, though the McLarens were still in front of them, stopping them from trying to steal the victory. Max actually pulled out, I think, a 2-second gap, and initially Oscar was being kept ahead of George thanks to getting a triple dose of DRS from Lando. But once he fell out of the DRS range, Russell made a bold move into the final corner on lap 64, making contact around the outside, basically turning into Piastri on the final chicane, which caused him to fall behind Hamilton. But Piastri and Norris in front hadn't come in for tires, and Piastri in particular was struggling with his rears. So Hamilton managed to pass him on the next lap, very cleanly with a great overspeed, and then was followed by Russell finally getting through. Ironically, on that same lap, we also had Yuki Tsunoda spin out. It was actually quite scary in the moment because he spun on the grass at turn 8 towards turn 9, and then there were two people right behind him, and Hulkenberg managed to somehow dodge him. And I don't know how he didn't clip his front wing. But yeah, Yuki managed to get his car driving, and I think he finished the race. And yeah, then it was a question of which of the Mercedes is going to finish ahead of the other. George Russell managed to get past Hamilton on the second last lap with his mediums giving him great traction plus the DRS. He was able to pass him on the faster part of the track by doing a kind of gutsy move where he went on the wet side of the track, which would become the inside line to the chicane. It was probably due to his incident with Piastri earlier, where he went on the outside, and also because he didn't have a DRS overspeed where he could be in front of the other car. This would give him the line for or give him the corner because he's on the inside, and there's not enough space for two cars on that going into that chicane. But him being on the wet side ironically caused him to lock up, and he lost momentum out of the final corner. And it looked like Hamilton was maybe going to get past, but he didn't have DRS, and because George had DRS, he was able to stay in front. And yeah, that basically was the last move of note that was shown on the TV coverage, leading us to the final leading us to the finish, where we had Max Verstappen winning again, followed by Lando Norris and George Russell. The reason why I say it's the last of the overtakes that we know about is because there was actually some late drama in Team Alpine. They pulled a Racing Bulls Bahrain where they asked the drivers to swap positions. And just like then when Tsunoda said why, we had Ocon in front of Gasly, who might be staying with the team. And they had Ricardo in front of them, who was 1.2 seconds, I think, in front of Ocon, with Gasly about 1.5 seconds behind Ocon. So first, Ocon asked why, and then you have to give me a reason, because literally he's been in front the whole time. Pierre was not able to catch up to him, or would not be able to pass him. And so at first he said no, and then he let Gasly go with 3 laps to go. Though it has been said that on the radio on Gasly's side, they had already told him that he might have to force his way past. Anyway, so there's been a little bit of drama in Team Alpine with Ocon not being happy that they asked him to do this because the team gets the same amount of points, so it should have made no difference. And especially because because Ricardo in front had the pace. And yeah, with Max winning this race, according to Crafty, this makes, and also Team Sky, because I heard it 3 times now, Max now has got his 60th win overall. And this is his 50th race win since 2020. Which kind of is nuts, but also kind of makes sense. With 24 races in a calendar year, some of these records that were historic are just like the fact that you can win 48 races in 2 years, whereas in 2001. I'm gonna just Google this. 2001 Formula One Championship. I'm pretty sure there were 8 races. Wikipedia, my source of all my data. Okay, there was more than 8. It's probably 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. There were 17 races in 2001. Okay, I must be thinking of a year before. Anyway, the point is 13. It would take you 3 years to do what you can do in two. So just extrapolate that going further back in time. I think I'm thinking about 1999, 1998. Is that when I started watching Formula One? Please be 8 races. Yes, no. 12 races. Okay, 12. 4 years. Okay, so it's not that drastic when you think about it. Anyway, so what is the general story of the Canadian GP? Well, it was a race where many drivers made mistakes throughout the race. We had Charles locking up, trying to maximize his lines at the beginning of the race, as well as when he was struggling on hards on a wet track. We had Lando Norris and Max locking up in the first corner, with Max going across the grass and Lando taking a shortcut across the tar. We had a few drivers who took shortcuts across the grass at turns 8. Oh, great. I don't know what the damn track corner names are. We had we had a few drivers taking shortcuts across the grass, including the likes of Magnussen, Zoe, and Hamilton at turns number 3, turns number 7, and turns number 8. Not that most of those were on purpose. It was a race that made you understand why fans of the sport specifically ask for a wet race with changeable conditions, and is probably one of the reasons why I truly believe that 2024 could be an amazing year of F1. Regardless of if Max Verstappen wins another championship, and even if he dominates the second half or whatever, there could be a million twists and turns along the way. And I'm looking forward to the next race weekend in 2 weeks at Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya. Starting off a magical triple header that includes beautiful racing tracks known as Austria and Silverstone. Anyways, this was my first attempt at a race rundown. I don't know. The debrief at the beginning felt more boring, and then the middle was kind of and then the end, the little segment at the end, I think maybe was the best part. Let me know if you like this. I will try and see if I can do these for the rest of the year for each of the races. And if you think I can improve on things, please let me know. If the things that you like, please let me know. I plan to keep things simple and see if my voice and simple graphics, or even just one graphic, is enough. And down the line, the better I get at this, the more effort I'll put into it. I would then release the content the day after to do some graphics and maybe even some animations. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed some of what I had to share. Until next time, have a great one. This has been the F1 Outlook.